Hey, everybody. I'm excited for this episode today. Question for you. As you're on your journey, how many times have you reflected back to yourself and said, when you're outside of having that experience filled with shame, when you're like, oh man, I can't believe I'm here, and there's the self loathing, just thought to yourself, thinking about the root, like, what's at the root? Like, what is actually going on here? And whether you've done work with a professional or not, I'm excited to have a conversation today of more some of what's at the root with a conversation with Kevin. We're going to jump into it. Welcome to Beyond the Facade podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gordon, and I'm thrilled to have you join me in this space today. What we're going to be doing is diving deep into the trials and triumphs and truths of seeking authenticity. Becoming your true self isn't about a single action or moment. It's a relentless pursuit, a commitment to self that reveals the rich connection and meaning that our life has to offer. So whether this is your first time tuning in or you're a regular listener, know this: what you're building here goes beyond a conversation. You're here to challenge, to change, and to celebrate the incredible journey of becoming your authentic self. Because when you dare to show up fully, the rewards are immeasurable. So welcome to Beyond the Facade. Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome. Again, I am really excited to introduce you to Kevin Meek. Kevin is somebody I've known for a little bit. Him and his wife, they have an organization called Living Stones Coaching, and he's a mentor. And 13 years of, what do you want to call it? 13 years of what, Kevin?
Recovery and sobriety.
13 years of recovery and sobriety. The thing I find really powerful about Kevin and his story is he was diagnosed with autism. How long ago, Kevin?
That'd be about actually 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that, the impact that had before then on relationships, because that's what we talk a lot about here, connection and intimacy with other people, and how the stuff that we have going on underneath the surface or above the surface, how that impacts that. But we're going to talk about that today. So I'm going to kick this off with acknowledging that Kevin and I both experience neurodiversity. But we're going to focus on Kevin's experience with it. And there's some key aspects. Kevin, do you mind speaking about yourself and telling people who you are, since I just slaughtered it?
No, that's great. Thanks so much for that. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Really found myself struggling in a journey of life and not really feeling like I was fitting in. I was struggling in my relationship at home. And as a result of that, I made poor decisions and ended up having multiple affairs. From that, then began a very strong and connected recovery program for that. When we first started recovery, my wife was kind of like, look, it's your problem. You need to figure this out. And so I was 3 years into recovery before my wife took a pause to look at some of the things going on in her life as well. And then in our relationship, we were both very committed to figuring this thing out. And for the next 10 years after that, we banged our head against the wall, trying to figure out how it just seemed like we were two ships just kind of passing. And the harder that I would try to connect with my wife, the more I missed. And we tried a lot of different things. We had been through intensives. We had been through several different counselors, and we had looked at some other diagnoses. And it was really Shauna's therapist one day who said, gosh, a lot of these things that you're sharing with me about Kevin really sounds like he might be on the autism spectrum. And immediately Shauna said, no, he's not autistic. And when she shared it with me, I go, no, I don't think I'm autistic. And we dismissed it and continued to struggle with that until I heard a podcast from somebody who was autistic, and they shared a little bit about what their life was like. And it just hit me. And I was like, wow, that's me. And I'm a registered nurse by background, so I have a clinical lens. And so I wanted to have a full neuroclinical psychological evaluation done. So I went in, no preconceived tips to the therapist that I thought I was autistic or anything like that. And because I wasn't sure if it really was, or maybe there was ADHD or some component of that. And after a really thorough evaluation, I was diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder level 1 at the age of 50. And really, man, you want to talk about just getting hit with another relational, I don't want to call it a betrayal, but just another thing to grieve in the relationship. It was a big hit for us.
Yeah, I got a couple questions from your story. Really, really powerful. Why did you dismiss it? What what made you sit and hear it at first and somebody say it, and why the dismissing it?
Yeah, great question. I think unfortunately, I fell into the same stereotypical societal view of autism as other people do, which we think of the Rain Man with the headphones on,
Mhm.
rocking in the
Yep.
chair. We think of kids that are in school that are on special programs. And unfortunately, that's the view that is in society. Now, that individual is more of an autistic level 3. And remember, it's a spectrum. So there's different levels.
Mhm.
The autism spectrum 1, it used to be called Asperger's or high functioning autism. So these are individuals that hold jobs, they have relationships, they are good with finances, all of those types of things. And so I have 5 college degrees, I have a good job, I'm respected in my field. And so it didn't seem like it fit to what stereotypically was thought of as autism. So that's why initially we didn't think that was it. I had a therapist who actually said, "No, I don't think you have autism because you can make eye contact." And while that is a component of autism, having a difficulty with eye contact, it's not the one and done. As often is said, when you meet one autistic, you've met one autistic, because how the characteristics display across different people are all really unique.
Yeah, that was, I don't know, I have strong feelings about that you met with a professional and they said, "Okay, you make a good eye contact, so that means that can't be the case." So,
Yeah, I actually had a therapist that I fired who was just irate at me. And basically what he told me was, "Kevin, you continue to just try and find excuses."
mm,
And the reality is it wasn't trying to find excuses. It was, we were struggling and continuing to try and find what was underneath that, what
yeah,
was the root.
yeah.
And so, yeah, it's unfortunate that it can be misdiagnosed in high functioning individuals many times.
Alright, so, yeah, I got a question for you. What was it like for you when you got the diagnosis?
Hmm. Man, what's crazy is oftentimes in recovery, we can remember D-Day like it was yesterday, right? Regardless of how long ago it was. And I can remember the day that we received my diagnosis from the clinical psychologist like it was yesterday. It had that big of an impact to us. We felt that we were going to get a diagnosis of autism, and we did. And this psychologist was fantastic. She nailed all the components, really spoke to my wife, Shauna, and addressed things that she had probably seen over the years and gave them meaning and gave them a point. And then we hung up the phone. And I remember Shauna and I just sitting there on the couch together, really just feeling like we had both just taken a gut punch. And about the only words that I could really muster up to her were that I was so sorry that this could have looked so different. And she thanked me for that. And then I went upstairs and curled up in a ball and literally rocked myself
Mm,
to sleep. And what I meant by it could have looked so different is this, just the pain and the struggle and the hardship that we went through for really post discovery for over a decade. And really in our relationship, we'd been together for 20 some years. We have a really unique story that we were married, divorced, and remarried. And then infidelity came in our second marriage. And so, that's a lot of history that could have looked really different. And I do believe, as does my wife, that my autism played a role into some of those camouflaging and masking and facading over the years. And it was a really hard time for us because I think our relationship could have looked really different.
that's powerful,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much of it is just me projecting on you, like, my own experience, but I don't know, to be able to, let's just say what comes to my mind is that I could imagine somebody not knowing the impact of finally getting information and what that would do to your body, to go, "Oh, here's information, like, that I didn't know, and how could this have looked different?"
Yeah.
I just find that to be really impactful.
Yeah.
Could you speak to like your wife and her saying like, yeah, I don't know if he's got it either. And then her getting the information. Cause I don't know. I don't want to put that on you. Like, did you know, did she not want you to have it? Or, and then later when she got it, can you speak to that?
Yeah. And again, I think for so many, it's that stereotypical view. So I'm a nurse. So I'm a male nurse. My wife had struggled with that at times in the past. I always want to be a doctor. And I think that there's these kind of the facade that we want others to see of us. And I think that there was really some protection of that and not wanting to have that. I also know that, so one of the things those of us with a neurodiversity and autism really struggle with is that emotional connection. And that is something that is just the deepest desire for my wife. And I think that there was probably a part of that she didn't want to accept that might be a reality as well. And if it is, then I don't know if I'm ever going to get the depth of emotion that I want in my relationship. And that was really hard for her as well. What we've been able to work through is realizing that, okay, that depth that we both desire, and that's a key important part, that we both do desire that depth. I just struggle to get there. She can go there in the split second, and it takes me work to get there. We have that depth of connection in our relationship today. It doesn't look the same as neurotypical couples or couples who don't struggle with autism in their relationship. It does take some more work for us. We do have to navigate some challenges along the way with my miscuing and some of those things that come up in conversations. But we're really now focused on making it the best that it can be.
That's really cool. Okay. So can you I would love to hear you talk about, and let me set us up like this. I have a really intense ADHD. Like
Mhm.
and I have a lot of like rejection sensitivity as a part of ADHD, just hyper
Yeah.
aware of other people's emotions, all this stuff,
Yeah.
ADHD. And I've finally been listening to enough people that I've been like really, really successful people that have ADHD I've even heard people say it's like a superpower. And
Yeah.
now I've been tying in what I've been able to accomplish in my life for my ADHD. And
Yeah.
now I'm like fond of it in a way and appreciative of it. And now I see it in other men and I'm like, I don't know. It's like so can you contrast or can you compare that to what you experience and talk about the powerful parts of autism?
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think that the one word that when people ask me, so what was it like to get a diagnosis of autism? The one word that I use over and over again is empowering. It was so like we had struggled for so long to figure out what that root was. And so it became very empowering. The one thing I want to mention with that is that my diagnosis of autism can and never should be an excuse for any of my behavior. My choices were still my choices. Yes, I have autism. I've had it my whole life. Didn't know it, but that doesn't excuse the fact that because I didn't know it, that I get a get out of jail free card or a hall pass because of it. And so for me, it became very empowering to say, okay, so I have autism. What are the tools now? Just as I put tools in place for my recovery to stay sober and to not have relapse and everything else, now what are the tools that I need to put in place in my relationship to grow because of my autism? And I do believe that there are really successful things, as you've mentioned, that people learn and can put into place. I have an emotion check-in that pops up on my phone that gets me to engage with emotions. I have questions that are written down that I ask my wife. And the first times, yeah, it might feel a little robotic, but the more that we get to do that, the more that it becomes natural for us and how we can express ourselves. But the other thing too is, for instance, holidays or events that are really loud. Those are so overwhelming for me. Now I have not plugs, but I have ear devices that I put in that help bring that noise down, to help calm that stimulation. I, if I need to go take a walk for, well, great example, we went to Disneyland and every 3 hours, dad had a brain break and didn't matter what we were doing. I went and found a quiet spot in the park and I just took some breaths and just reset myself because all of the people, the noises, the lights, the everything else, it just overwhelmed me. So in the past, I would lose my crap by the afternoon and make the happiest place on earth the most frightening for the kids. And so finding way. And so it became very empowering that I could do that. And my family is supporting me in that, not going, what's dad doing over there now? And so that's how we've been able to embrace it and really not just in our relationship, but even as a family relationship, feel empowered through that.
What did you, I'm all of a sudden drawn back to that podcast you listened to that made you wonder for the first time. As I listen to you talk about like sensory overload with just sound, like any breaks, what did you hear somebody say that went like, huh, maybe? What, do you remember the kind of stuff that you heard?
I do, because I've listened to that podcast numerous times since then to continue it. It really came down to a couple of things. One was the feeling of overwhelmed emotionally. So when either in a space like Disneyland like that, or even in a conversation with my wife, who is very emotionally attuned to herself, I can feel very overwhelmed with questions and with share with me how you're feeling. Like all of those things became very challenging for me. Finding myself connecting with hobbies to distract myself. So when I look at areas in my recovery where I fell short, it was often because I became busy and I got busy with maybe work or a task or something else and putting processes and projects over people. And then the last component was this complex word that they talked about called alexithymia, which is really the difficulty acknowledging feelings both in ourselves and what others are experiencing. So my wife would often say, gosh, sweetheart, you don't cry when I cry. Like your emotion isn't there. And she would take that to feel like I'm not upset over something because my emotion didn't match hers. And many times we would get into disagreements over that. And so being able to acknowledge those differences, and I'm like, that's exactly what I do. And I dove a little more into it and the shoe fit.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on what you feel inside around, I can't sense what it's funny. I'm asking you to feel about the not being able to feel like, can you do whatever you can to describe what you experience?
Yeah. One of the things so I struggle with just identification of a feeling. And so I use a lot of somatic. I'll feel tightness in my chest, or I feel an emptiness in my gut, or I feel a pain in my head. And then we use a tool instead of the feelings wheel, because that can be very complex for somebody with neurodiverse. We use a mood meter. And so is it pleasant or unpleasant? And then what's the amount of energy that is in that sensation? And then that helps us narrow in this ballpark of feelings. And then it's like, oh, okay. So now I can connect that experience and in that body sensation to a feeling and begin to bridge that gap. So I think for me, it was a lot of tension, and which now I would call the anxiety and just that stress of knowing what this is, having it inside and trying to hold it in.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
One of the things I was looking most forward to talking to you today was this thing called masking. Okay? So let's tie this into a little bit of the name of the podcast, which is called Beyond the Facade. And I always envision, and not that the name wasn't created out of this, but Beyond the Facade was like masking, like I'm trying to hide you from me. But I also want to have it be more, not broad, but more powerful and have more meaning of what masking actually is, what the mask is about. So can you tell us what masking has to do with what we're talking about today?
I love that. And I'll use two words interchangeably there. We talk about, which is masking and camouflaging.
Okay.
And really they go hand in hand. And again, they're both a facade. And oftentimes when someone who's neurodiverse is trying to interact socially in a social environment. So think of a party with friends over, right? That's a very stressful situation. It's overwhelming, but we know we're supposed to be fitting in. And so I walk into a conversation and it's two guys, they're talking about basket weaving, right? Oh man, did you get those new reeds? And did you get that, and well, I mean, Kevin, you know how to do that too, right? Yeah. I mean, I sure do. I haven't done it in a lot, and it's just crap. I don't know anything about that. So you fit in. You're trying to camouflage and to mask into that situation to be a part of that. Mm-hmm. And that is a really strong part of somebody who is neurodiverse with autism. That is exhausting work.
Exhausting.
Exhausting. And so what typically happens is, so again, I said I'm very successful at work. So I go to work in the morning. Good morning, Kevin. Good morning. Good morning, Tom. Good morning. And I am masking and coping all day long. We use the analogy of I'm spending spoons. And then I get in the car. Yeah, spending spoons is what my wife and I, so it's how many spoons do you have left at the end of the day when you come home? And by the time I've navigated traffic and everything else, I come home and I'm empty. And then my wife says, "Oh, hi, babe. Welcome." How? I got nothing left. And at that point, the exhaustion of masking and coping and camouflaging all and coping to get through my day are over. And now here comes, the angry, the frustrated, the everything else that comes out from the day, because I didn't know how to express and share with my boss that I was upset with him. And so I just smiled and took it like a champ and then came home. And it really is a strong component of autism, that masking and camouflaging. There's actually, if your listeners want to check it out, there's actually an assessment. It's called the CAT, CAT-Q. It's the CAT-Q, and it's a camouflage and masking assessment for somebody. And really what it does is it asks you these situations and how you interact with them. And really for anyone that has a neurodiversity or a codependency or something like that, because it's not just neurodiverse that may mask or camouflage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to try to articulate this and maybe you could help me clean it up if it needs it. You're talking about going through the day, showing up the way that you're supposed to, saying hi, and your cup's getting drained or your spoons are given away, whatever you said about the spoon. And I think about that with my neurodiversity, that's exactly how I feel. Like, exactly. I'm just done. And then the people that I love the most get left with nothing at the end of the day because I have nothing. It's not because I don't want to give them anything. It's I have.
Right.
I've spent so long going, Luke, get your crap together. Come on, dude, get your crap together. Like, you got to be more emotionally present. And what I didn't realize is for other people that would fill their cup, that would empty my cup.
Absolutely.
And I was just like, what's wrong with me? Like, what's wrong with me? And I think that's why I found your story so powerful is that's why it was so impactful to hear, oh, this is a part of my experience. And again, not as an excuse to not engage. That's why when I'm at Disneyland, that's why I take the breaks so I can be engaged because my brain doesn't work the same as other people's.
That's why when I come home from work, maybe I need to take 30 minutes to just go be by myself and reset before I come back and engage with the family. So I don't pop off over who hasn't picked up their shoes or their backpack from the day. It's finding those tools, just like we did in recovery to be sober and to have longevity with that. It's finding those tools that we can employ and that we can partner with our wife and our family to be successful, right? That's really the goal, is to be successful in our relationships.
Yeah. There was a part of masking or camouflaging that I wanted to get to and get your thoughts on this. I think a lot of, if I could speak to the betrayed partner or the partner in healing, often when I sit with them and I get the opportunity when we do women's intensives to go in and do a guest speaking and answer questions, get inside the brain of somebody who experiences compulsive behavior, ask any question you want to, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
They do a lot of the, how could he lie to me? How could he do what he did? Like, how could he be aware of it? And then I think about like, well, it's not like you're extremely present in your values at the point you act outside your values. You're not present. And I think about the masking piece, and I think about with my own version of masking, it's the layers of different ways of coping that allowed me to not really be present. And 100%. I don't think I had the ability to understand the level of masking that I was doing and how much of a journey it was to actually understand what masking actually looked like for me. Like, where did I end and where did the masking begin? What was me and what was not? What was masking?
Totally agree. And I think that, remember, this is something that we've struggled with our entire life. So when we were kids growing up and making friends and everything else, that masking and that facade really became a part of who we were at an early age. And then that facade grew with us as we got older. And we no longer just have this little kid facade because we stick out all around it. So that facade had to get bigger because our faces got bigger. And so it really became who we were. And that's the part that was so empowering for me, is that when I had a diagnosis and we finally could go, this is what it is, I no longer felt like I had to carry that facade around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now I tell people, I'm sorry, I do struggle with autism. And that's part of why I was kind of rude to you there. My apologies for that in my tone and how that came across. What I was really trying to say was this, right? And I own it and I take it and I move on. I don't carry shame with it. Yeah, there's things that I do that I'm not overly proud of, my tone, my inflections and things like that. But it's who I am. It's how God created me and made me.
Yeah. Kevin, when it comes to people that are sitting there going, oh, maybe there is something to this. You mentioned like there's the cat. What did you say? What'd you call it?
Yeah, the CAT-Q or CAT-Q assessment.
Yeah. Did you say that you can just Google that and find that anywhere? Or was there somewhere you recommended that people go to?
So I do think that there is a great website that has many assessments on it. It is Embrace-Autism. And that was actually the website that was referenced in the podcast that I first listened to. And as soon as I finished the podcast, I went to the coffee shop and got online and dove into it. And so a lot of good information there. That's specific to autism. There's another website out there. It is ANE. And that is the Autism and Asperger's Network. And that has neurodiversity components in that. And yeah, we're just really passionate, again, to help folks that are committed to this journey of recovery and betrayal, repair, and restoration in their relationships, and still struggling to connect the dots along the way.
Yeah. Where would people find you if they wanted to meet you?
Yeah, great. They can just check out our website, which is livingstones.coaching.com. And there's information on there for my wife and I. And my wife actually wrote a book about our story that's available through the website as well. And yeah.
What's the name of the book?
The book is actually called Determined for More.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, I totally encourage people to go check all of that stuff out. I think you guys are giving everybody a gift, and I appreciate that so much. It's the way that you talk about your journey. It's really beautiful. Specifically how you just own like past behavior, and own your experience. I think it's empowering. Do you have any like last closing thoughts, Kevin, for our listeners?
I do. I think that the one thing is that I just want to encourage folks that if you are in a neurodiverse relationship and there has been betrayal in that relationship as well, there is hope. It can be done. It takes intentionality. It takes work, but the reward is so much greater. My wife and I have, at times we feel like we've been through hell and back. And for those that have gone through this journey as well, you can relate to that. And as weird as it is, we both say, but we wouldn't trade it. We wouldn't, because we know we wouldn't be where we are today had we not been through what we had to get through to get here. There's hope and there's encouragement for it.
One last message. If this is appropriate, and I recognize it's not her words, what would your wife be saying to the partners of the men that listen to this? What message would she have to say to because we do have the partner in healing, the betrayed partner, listen to these podcasts often. What would she be saying to them?
I think there's kind of two sides to that. One is, did you know before the betrayal that your husband was neurodiverse? Or did you find out, or do you think maybe your husband is neurodiverse as a result of the work that you've done post-discovery as you're working through the betrayal side of it? And those both have a component of that. There is a grief and a loss that happens with betrayal. And there is a grief and a loss that comes in a relationship that didn't know you were neurodiverse, that then found out you were neurodiverse. And so it's really important that the two are looked at separately and how they might affect each other. And then really how you have to, as individuals, both the betrayer and the betrayed, work through each of those components.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, everybody, thank you for taking the time to listen today. We appreciate you. It's a journey, Kevin.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's no end. Like there's no finish. There's no make it. There is new information. There's There's new information, there's new levels of awareness, there's new tools that can be used, there's new areas to connect, to be seen, and to have it look and feel different. Not that necessarily means that there's going to be an absence of pain in all of that. But anyway, thank you again, Kevin. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. If this is something that you connected with, I'd love to meet with you more and talk about it. So what you can do is go to chooserecoveryservices.com or check the show notes. And there, what we can do is set up a quick conversation meeting. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Facade, where we unmask the authentic self.